family, sisters, and brothers. That was Rabbi Eitan Katz singing his original composition, the Elul Nigun. How are you? We've got such a special story to share with you. We're going to do a little bit of a tribute to Rabbi Dr. Avraham Twerski of blessed memory. Left this world a couple days ago at the age of 90, succumbed tragically to COVID-19. He was one of the great Torah lights of the last 90 years. I mean, an incredible, just sharer of wisdom and of love and of positivity, and a great message that we will be sharing. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we do some beautiful learning on a fine Tuesday evening? Melissa in Great Neck, Rochelle in Modesto, Matt in Eau Claire, Yehudit in South Carolina, Marjorie in Georgia, Stephen in New Hampshire, Paul in Chicago, Harold in Loretta in Oregon, Samantha in Tacoma, Jonathan Hain saying shalom from the land of 10,000 lakes. Is that Minnesota or Wisconsin? I'm sorry, I ought to know. Probably wrong on both cases. Shalom says James in Indy. Jonathan loves Eitan's music. Bill is in Arkansas. Nancy in North Carolina. Donna Smith with us from Bahama, North Carolina. So good to see you here, Donna. Isabel says shalom. Teresa in Texas. Patrice in Utah. Susan, hello again from London. And Anne in Merced. Over there on the YouTube side, Lindsay in Cincinnati. Lynn in Texas. Michael says shalom. And Neil in Virginia. Welcome, everybody. Tonight's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by Janet Sumi in honor of her good friend and mentor, Shirley S. We are praying that she is feeling better, and dedication from her, from saying, Janet saying to Shirley from your pal, Janet. So may Shirley S. have a refuah shlema, a complete healing of body, mind, spirit, everything. We should only hear good news, and we say amen. And Janet, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings, and we say amen. We are holding on Daf Ayin Gimel, that's page 73, here in Tractate Pesachim, the fourth volume of the Talmud, the laws of Passover. We are going to complete our discussion of what is it? I think it's the third Mishna here in chapter 6, and with it, chapter 6. So there were just only 3 Mishnas in this chapter. Tomorrow we'll get into chapter 7. But before we get into our daf, I want to make a little tribute to Rabbi Avraham Twerski M.D. There probably will never be another like him. Rav Twerski was not only a rabbi, not just a rabbi, okay? So he was descended directly from the Chernobyl Rebbe, the founder of the Chernobyl Hasidic dynasty, and on his mother's side, a direct descendant of the Bobover Rebbe. So his yichus, his lineage is just incredible. But also he was a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, who was not just any psychiatrist. He was very prominent in his field. He specialized in addiction and recovery, and really, contributed tremendously to the field. He was the head. Let me get this information correct in front of me. Wait a minute, where is it? Over here. He was, let me just get this right. He was the clinical director of psychiatry at St. Francis Hospital in Pittsburgh for over 20 years. In 1972, he founded the Gateway Rehab in Pittsburgh, where he served as the medical director emeritus. He also was the author of 60 books. And he said that really he only wrote one book. And his lesson that all his books were about was the importance of self-esteem. Now that's a little bit surprising. How often do we talk about the emphasis that our sages place on humility? Right? Humility, the importance of humility. So is it so important that a person has proper self-esteem? Yes, it is incredibly important. Because the reason that people fall into addiction, and not just substance addiction, but addiction to destructive behaviors in general, is, according to Rav Twerski, because they don't really have a proper understanding of their own self-worth as a soul that was sent into this world on a mission. And when people really come to understand that they are a child of God, a unique soul with a unique mission in this world, then they wouldn't, treat themselves like garbage or engage in such risky behavior that people do. A proper sense of self-esteem. And this is why actually in the Talmud we learn that at all times a person should carry 2 slips of paper in their pockets. And the one pocket, it should say, I am nothing but dust and ashes, right? There's the humility lesson. But in the other pocket, a person should carry a note that says, the entire world was made for me. Meaning that the world I'm going to encounter and interact with, I was sent here for a mission, and I need to take myself, my skills, my gifts, my blessings, my allies, my assets seriously to see if I can engage everything that I am and everything that is around me to try and fulfill that unique and holy mission for which I was sent. It's a very beautiful and important lesson. Rav Twerski was, I never met him personally. I wish that I had. But he was very instrumental in my journey. Shortly after I reconnected with Judaism, I recently told the story of my grandmother's passing and how that was what inspired me to reconnect with Judaism and start learning. One of the rabbis, I'm not even sure which, of the classes that I was taking right at the beginning as I reconnected, suggested I get this book. So this is Rav Twerski's book, Living Each Day. And it's basically, like 4 teachings for every day of the year. Every day of the calendar, he's got a new teaching, a little Hasidic story, a little Hasidic teaching, maybe something from the Talmud. But kind of arranged in the calendar according to the yearly cycle. This one is, I got it so early. This one is for 1997 to 2003 is the way the calendar is laid out. You repeat the teachings each year. It's a 1-year book, but they lay out the calendar for about 5 years. It's a 5-year layout. I know it's been reprinted and you can get it now, for the calendar now as it is. But this is a spectacular book. Today, I'm going to share a story from another spectacular book. Like I said, he wrote 60 and they're all great. Some of them were major contributions to medicine. Some were major contributions to popular literature. A lot of them were a little bit more specifically guided to people who want to grow in Jewish wisdom. But this book is just amazing. Not just stories. Because Rav Twerski came, from this line of Rebbes on both his mother's and his father's side, and Rebbes with a particular inclination toward masterful storytelling. So Rav Twerski was always a tremendous storyteller who collected just about all of the great Hasidic stories and wrote down so many of them so that they've been preserved and they can be told in the best and most dramatic and most colorful way. This is one of my favorite stories. My copy is very dog-eared, lots of notes in here. But this one story that I want to share with you is one I've thought about many times. Normally when I tell a Hasidic story that I've harvested, as it were, from Rav Twerski's book, I learn it well, and then I just tell it, basically paraphrasing. Obviously I keep all the beats and a lot of the same phrases as he would tell it, but I really put it into my own words, the way we do when we tell a joke. Tonight, I'm going to read it to you straight from the book because I'd like you to hear it in his words. I'm trying to transmit Rav Twerski in his own words. Earlier today on the main page at Accidental Talmudist and in the forum as well, I shared just a little 1 minute and 15-second video of Rav Twerski himself giving over his very important lesson of the lobster. Right? I mean, he was a Hasidic rabbi, right? When he would make the rounds in the hospital, he would wear the white coat. But beneath the white coat, he was wearing full Hasidic garb. On Shabbos, he had the beautiful big black shtreimel of the Chernobyl Hasidic dynasty. I mean, he was a Hasidic Jew with the long white beard. And that video is about a lobster. How often do you hear a Hasidic rabbi talking about lobster? But his lesson is so beautiful. He says, how does a lobster grow? A lobster has an exoskeleton. So as it gets bigger, and the skeleton is inflexible. So as a lobster grows, it starts to become very uncomfortable in its skin. At a certain point, it's so uncomfortable that it goes down under the rocks and hides so that it won't be vulnerable to predators. And then it sheds the old skin and a new one takes its place. So that tremendous discomfort is what leads to growth. And Rav Twerski said that that's a lesson in how to handle stress. Some stress, I mean, it's clinical, it's chemical. Okay, we're not talking about that. But so much of our stress is because we're really uncomfortable with what's going on in our surroundings. If we medicate for that kind of stress, and this is Rav Twerski M.D, as a prominent psychiatrist telling us, don't medicate for every kind of stress. Very often, stress is happening. We're very uncomfortable in our skin because we recognize that something is not right in our world. And it's not that we should ignore it and medicate it because then we won't grow. It's when we start to become uncomfortable that way and start finding ourselves complaining about what's going on around us, that is a growth opportunity. Something is calling. You're uncomfortable because you are a unique soul with a unique mission in this world. And if you're uncomfortable, it's because there's something in the world that you need to fix. Another lesson of Rav Twerski is it's possible that, that your parents made terrible mistakes bringing you up. And perhaps you became the person you are because of the way your parents raised you. But if you have a problem with something about yourself and your character, staying that way is not something you can blame your parents for. If you stay that way, you have only yourself to hold responsible for that. So when you start to get uncomfortable, that is a signal. Growth opportunity. Okay, now let me share this story. With a little introduction from him and then the story told itself. So there is a principle, says Rav Twerski, in Torah that God does not ask anything of us that is beyond our ability to accomplish. We learn that in the Talmud, in Avodah Zarah, Daf Gimel, Amud Aleph. Avodah Zarah, page 3a. A person need only decide, quote, is this what God wants of me? If the answer is positive, there should not be any question whether it is feasible. Because of our tendency to rationalize, we should seek guidance from a competent person to help us determine what it is that God asks of us when it is not clearly evident to us. For otherwise, we may come to an incorrect conclusion in order to spare ourselves the hardships involved, right? So when you see that something's going on, something needs to be done, you're wondering if this is, if you are the camel and you've been given a load that's appropriate to you and it requires action, but you're not sure if that's what you were sent here to do. Okay, so find a person that you trust, a wise person that you trust, and run it through with them. All right, but the main lesson that this story seeks to teach, according to Rav Twerski, is that there is nothing beyond our ability if it clearly has been placed before us to do, right? If God gives you a mission, you have the ability to realize it. Rabbi Levi Yitzhak, so that's Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev, and his colleague, Rabbi Menachem Mendel, were busily engaged in preparation for a wedding. In fact, all the townspeople were engaged in the preparations because the bride and groom were orphans and had been raised by the kind people of the community. Everyone felt as though it was his own child who was getting married, and the town was buzzing with activity. Suddenly, the news spread through the town that a team of kidnappers had come to the community. So now you're starting to get the picture. We're in the 1700s, in the Pale of Settlement. This is Russia, or Russia-controlled, the Czar, who was no great lover of the Jews. That is for sure. Suddenly, the news spread through the town that a team of kidnappers had come to the community. These were scoundrels who would kidnap a young man and haul him off to be conscripted into the Tsarist army for a period of 25 years. If you got drafted into the Tsar's army, it was for 25 years. If you were from a traditional Jewish family, this is almost like dying. Because when you go into that army and for 25 years, there's no way you're going to be able to keep Shabbos, eat kosher, pray, anything, any kind of Jewish practice. You'll be beaten within an inch of your life, and if you keep trying to do it, you'll be killed for it. So it's a total disaster if a young man were to get taken into that Tsar's army. Upon hearing the news, all young men of military age took cover, but the bridegroom, who was apparently so preoccupied with the upcoming wedding that he did not hear the news or had just not heeded it, did not go into hiding and was seized by the kidnappers. When the community became aware of the kidnapping, gloom descended upon it, and the day of anticipated joy turned into a day of bitter mourning. The young bride was in tears. There was no consoling her. Once the young man had been handed over to the military authority, there was no way of gaining his release. Any attempt to bribe the official was fraught with the risk of being convicted of a capital crime and executed. Rabbi Menachem Mendel, who had been instrumental in bringing the young couple together, said to the distraught bride, "Have no fear, my child. God will help us. Your bridegroom will be returned to you this very day." When the young woman continued to weep, Rabbi Menachem Mendel said, "Did you hear? This very day he will be returned to you. I swear it." Upon hearing that the rabbi swore to it, the bride felt somewhat relieved. Clearly, the rabbi must know something, otherwise he would not have dared to swear to it. Rabbi Menachem Mendel hurried off to the local military attaché and made his way past the guards who tried to stop him into the inner room where the officer resided. He found the officer to be drunk, staggering across the floor. He looked at the rabbi with contempt and anger flaring from his eyes. "Dirty Jew! How did you get in here? What do you want here?" And he followed this with several choice expletives. Rabbi Menachem Mendel began to plead the case of the orphaned young man who was to be married that day. And could his lordship not find the mercy in his heart to release him? "Release him? Dirty dog! Never will I release him! Why do you think you can bribe me? I can have you shot for this, Jew! Do you think I will take 3,000 rubles to free someone from serving the Czar?" And the officer lifted the bottle of vodka to his mouth again. Rabbi Menachem Mendel felt a twinge of hope. At least the officer had quoted a figure, an enormous amount. Yet there was a slim ray of hope. "You think I will take 3,000 rubles for a bribe? Never. 5,000 rubles it must be. You Jews have all the money. 5,000 rubles before this day is over. And get out of here before I have you shot. Rabbi Menachem Mendel ran to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, whom he found immersed in prayer. Levi Yitzchak, he shouted, now is not the time for prayer. We must take action before the day is over. We must have 5,000 rubles. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak looked at him with bewilderment and said, how can the townspeople ever raise this enormous sum in one day? All the people together do not have 5,000 rubles. Then we will take their gold watches and silverware, Rabbi Menachem Mendel said. But we must begin promptly and go from door to door to save this young man's life. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak concurred, but said, let us get Shneur Zalman to go with us. That's Rebbe Shneur Zalman, the founder of Chabad the founder of the Chabad Hasidic dynasty. Perhaps he may be able to help us convince the people to part with their valuables. Rabbi Shneur Zalman readily agreed to join his friends, but with two stipulations. By the way, why were these three great rabbis all in the same town? For the wedding. Normally, they wouldn't all be in one place. This is all the way God arranges things. So Rabbi Shneur Zalman readily agreed to join his friends, but with two stipulations. First, they must make a list of whom they wished to solicit funds. And secondly, the decision as to how much to tax each person must be his, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, and his alone. Unless they agreed with these two conditions, he would not join them. Who has time to make lists? Rabbi Menachem Mendel said. Time is of the essence. We will go from door to door. Rabbi Shneur Zalman was adamant. Unless there was a list, he would not join them. Rabbi Menachem Mendel and Rabbi Levi Yitzchak had no choice but to make a list, which they showed to Rabbi Shneur Zalman, who then added one name to the top of the list. Rabbi Menachem Mendel looked at the added name and exclaimed, what? Voteshk, the miser. You expect us to waste our precious time to solicit from a person who cannot part with a single cent? Rabbi Shneur Zalman said that his stipulation remained and that they must see Voteshk first rather than last. Voteshk, as he was now called, was once known as Velvel. When he became wealthy, he withdrew from the Jewish community, left the Jewish neighborhood, assimilated with the non-Jewish population, and changed his name from Velvel to Voteshk. All attempts at gaining his participation in the realm of tzedakah, of charity, had been futile. Once there had been a desperate need for emergency funds, and the local rabbi felt that perhaps this might soften the miser's heart. But the latter gave him only a copper coin, which the angry rabbi threw back in his face. Without understanding why, but with unwavering trust in Rabbi Shneur Zalman's judgment, the trio made its way out to the Jewish quarter. Made their way out of the Jewish quarter to Voteshk's estate. They were permitted to enter, and Rabbi Menachem Mendel described the desperate plight of the young man and the anguish of the community. This time, Rabbi Menachem Mendel said, you have the opportunity of saving a life, which is equivalent to saving the world. Voteshk sighed and nodded. Yes, he said, I will help you. And he proceeded to open his wall safe, retrieving from there a single copper coin, a penny, green with mold, which he gave to Rabbi Menachem Mendel. Rabbi Shneur Zalman saw the rage in his comrade's eyes, and before Rabbi Menachem Mendel could throw the coin in Voteshk's face, he grabbed it from his hand and exclaimed, Thank you, Reb Velvel. May you have many more opportunities to do mitzvahs, to fulfill your obligations in charity. He seized his two comrades by their hands and headed for the exit. Although the two had previously trusted Rabbi Shneur Zalman, they now lost their faith in him. Thanking the miser for a penny when they had expected several hundred rubles? But as they were about to leave the house, they heard the voice of Vodeshk. "Please don't leave." They turned around, and Vodeshk beckoned to them to come back. "I am sorry for being so thoughtless," he said, and he proceeded to give them 2 handfuls of copper coins. I want to have a share in this mitzvah." Rabbi Shneur Zalman put the coins into a bag, saying, "God bless you, Rabbi Velvel." And again the trio headed for the door. Rabbi Menachem Mendel mumbled angrily under his breath, "Well, now we have 50 pennies, a whole half ruble." Again, as they were at the door, they heard the voice of Vodeshk. "Don't go yet." He approached them with a handful of coins, this time containing a few silver and even gold pieces. "I'm sorry I did not grasp the full gravity of this situation earlier. I will not bore you with the repetition of all the details of the 10 more recalls, with Vodeshk increasing his contribution each time until, at the last time, they had the full 5,000 rubles, with Vodeshk constantly apologizing for his previous behavior. The trio left in high spirits, and Rabbi Menachem Mendel ran to the office of the military officer. The official had consented to accept a bribe because he was under investigation, having been suspected of corruption and stealing government funds. He desperately needed the 5,000 rubles to cover his embezzlement. Rabbi Menachem Mendel approached the officer, who was still quite drunk. "Here is the 5,000 rubles, just as your lordship requested." The official counted the money and put it in his strongbox. "Now you will see that an officer of the Czar keeps his word," he said. He rang for his assistant. "Bring the crippled Jew here. The nerve of these scoundrels cheating the Czar out of 5 rubles and bringing this invalid to me. The Czar's army is composed of heroes, not cripples. Take him and leave." Joyous and triumphant, Rabbi Menachem Mendel took the young bridegroom and was greeted enthusiastically by Rabbi Levi Yitzhak and Rabbi Shneur Zalman. They rested a bit and then began their walk back home. They had just crossed a narrow bridge when they heard the thundering sound of horses' hooves and an approaching wagon. As the sounds grew louder and closer, they heard a screaming, "Faster, faster, you horses!" and the ferocious cracking of a whip. Rabbi Menachem Mendel recognized the voice of the officer who was driving his horses in a drunken frenzy. As he drove over the bridge in the darkness, he crashed through the railing and the wagon plunged into the river. There was a loud wail and then utter silence. The trio ran down to the riverbank to see whether they could rescue the officer. But in the light of the full moon, they saw nothing and heard nothing other than the soft flow of the river. As they left, the bridegroom's foot struck a hard object. It was the officer's strongbox. In the moonlight, they could see it contained not only the 5,000 rubles, but other valuables as well. The group made its way to the Jewish quarter, where the word of the miraculous salvation spread rapidly, and the populace gathered to celebrate. That evening, the joyous wedding surpassed in simcha, in joy, anything the community had ever experienced. And the 3 tzaddikim, the 3 righteous rabbis, were the heroes of the celebration. Later, Rabbi Shneur Zalman told his comrades, "Do not suspect me of having divine foresight. My reasoning was simple. I knew that it was impossible for us to raise 5,000 rubles from the meager donations of the townsfolk. Yet, not only were we obligated to try and save the young man, but having heard that Rabbi Menachem Mendel had sworn that he would return, I knew that his promise must come true. There was only one logical source for that huge amount of money, and that was Velvel Voteshk. You must understand what happened to this man. As he grew rich, he deviated from the practice of Judaism. He began to literally worship money. To him, money was as sacred as an idol is to a pagan. Many years ago, a man who was collecting tzedakah, charity, to marry off his daughter came to town, and needing several hundred rubles, he approached Velvel with the hope of getting a generous donation. If not 100 rubles, perhaps 50, even 30 would have been acceptable. Imagine the rage of this desperate man when Velvel gave him a copper penny. He threw the coin in Velvel's face and left in disgust. To Velvel, this was an unforgivable insult. He could forgive the personal offense to him, but this man had insulted money, which had become his god. Velvel was irate. "I'll teach these beggars to respect money. They are parasites and they don't work for a living, and that is why they can't degrade money. And that is why they degrade money." Following this incident, everyone who came to ask for alms was given the copper coin, and everyone's response was the same. Velvel had the coin thrown in his face. That copper coin lay in Velvel's wall safe for 20 years. And when I, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, graciously accepted it, Velvel's vengeance for the honor of his idol was appeased. The Talmud quotes God as saying, "Give me an opening as tiny as the point of a needle, and I will enlarge it to admit passage of huge wagons for you." That's Shir Hashirim Rabbah 5:3. The tiny opening in Velvel's heart had been made, and the rest you know. That's the end of the story. Rav Avraham Twerski adds, the Talmud says a wise man is superior to a prophet. That's Bava Basra 12a. Rabbi Shneur Zalman may not have been operating with prophetic foresight, but his wisdom was an even greater feat. Rabbi Shneur Zalman practiced that which he preached in the Tanya. Right, so this Rabbi Shneur Zalman is the founder of Chabad, the Chabad Hasidic dynasty, and he is the author of the Tanya. Nothing that is obligatory upon a person is impossible to achieve. I repeat, nothing that is obligatory upon a person is impossible to achieve, because God does not give us assignments that exceed our abilities. Things may seem difficult. Nay, they may appear impossible. But we must know that if something is incumbent upon us, we must try. The Torah assures us, God will bless you in all that you do. Deuteronomy 15:18. We must do, and our sincere efforts will merit the divine blessing. So often a task seems utterly impossible, but we don't have to think, "I'll never finish this." We only have to think, "God put this in my way. It's my role, it's my destiny, this task was given to me. Perhaps I won't complete it, perhaps I won't succeed in it, but I can start, I can try. And if God gave me this task, then either I'm going to achieve it or I'm going to achieve something that was given to me in this task, in this mission." May Rav Twerski's memory always be for a blessing. May his neshama, his soul, have a great, great aliyah. I mean, he's already right up there with the greatest sages in our history. The world is a little less bright with him gone, but his stories, his 60 books, his videos, his teachings, his incredible teachings, his contributions both to Jewish thought and to psychiatric medicine will live on beyond him, and we miss him. Okay, if you have questions about that story, put them in the comments. I'll be coming to that at the end of the class. Now let's actually do a little learning from the Talmud. As I mentioned before, we're on Daf Ayin Gimel, page 73, completing tonight chapter 6 here in Tractate Pesachim, the 4th volume of the Talmud, the laws of Passover. The Mishna that we've been studying has to do with, this is the third Mishnah here in chapter 6, and what happens when people make a mistake and they confuse one offering for another. That's what we've been discussing. And generally what we've been talking about in this chapter is if Passover begins on a Saturday night and we have to slaughter the Passover offering Saturday afternoon, so normally it's prohibited to shecht, to slaughter an animal for purposes of eating on Shabbos. But because the Passover offering has to be slaughtered the afternoon before Passover begins, that's the one exception. That's one of the exceptions where it will override the Shabbos prohibition on slaughtering. Also for the Sabbath offerings themselves, the additional offerings of the Sabbath, and the daily offerings which are offered even on Shabbos. But if you make a mistake and you think you're slaughtering the Passover offering, which overrides Shabbos, but then you slaughter a different offering, then you become liable to bring a sin offering because you violated Shabbos needlessly. That's the general principle that we've been studying. We learned in our, and I'm only going to do a small section of the daf since we're already well into our time together. So like I said, if you have questions, put them in the comments. So we learned in our Mishnah that if one unwittingly slaughtered the Paschal lamb on Shabbos, for those who cannot eat it, or for those who did not register for it, he is liable to bring a sin offering. The Gemara asks, it is obvious, since there, with regard to the slaughter itself, it is invalid. Here, with regard to Shabbos, he is liable, right? So the Gemara is saying, why does this even need to be said? If you're slaughtering the Passover lamb, right, that's qualified lamb, and people are registered for it, and the people that are registered for it are going to be able to eat it, and they're in a state of ritual purity, okay, then it's a valid slaughter that for you to fulfill your duty to bring the Passover offering, the people to be part of it and to eat it that night. But if they can't eat it, then you made an unnecessary slaughter and you violated Shabbos, and you didn't do that intentionally. If you did that intentionally, then you're not liable to bring a sin offering. Then the punishment is kares, excision, death at the hands of the heavenly court. But most likely this happened as a mistake. You didn't know that the people that registered for the lamb are not going to be able to eat it, or they became impure after you went off to slaughter it, etc. So it was an unintentional violation of Shabbos, so then you would become liable to bring the sin offering, right? So it seems obvious. Since there, with regard to the slaughter itself, it is invalid, here, with regard to Shabbos, he is liable. For it turns out that he performed the prohibited labor that was not necessary for sacrificing an offering. The Gemara answers, since the latter clause of the Mishnah taught cases in which he is exempt from bringing a sin offering, the first clause taught the cases in which he is liable, even though it does not really teach us anything new, right? So then there were exceptions to that rule that you would not be liable to bring the sin offering if it was really a reasonable error or an error that anybody would make, that it was an unavoidable error. So for example, if it turned out that the lamb that you slaughtered was a treifa, it had an internal defect, so that you couldn't know that until you slaughtered it and cut it open, as it were, to prepare it for eating, for cooking and for roasting and then eating. You couldn't know that until it had been slaughtered. So if that was the kind of defect in the lamb, you would be exempt from bringing the sin offering. But to know the cases in which you're exempt from bringing that sin offering for slaughtering on Shabbos, you first have to know the cases in which you would be liable to bring the sin offering. The Gemara relates that Rav Huna bar Chinana said to his son, when you go before Rabbi Zerika, ask him, according to the opinion that says that one who inflicts a destructive wound is exempt. Okay, so this is a new halacha that is being referred to here on our page. And so here the concept is, what are the labors which when we do them unwittingly cause us to become liable to bring a sin offering for violating Shabbos, right? There are 39 categories of prohibited labor on Shabbos. What are they? They are the types of labor that were necessary when the children of Israel were wandering in the wilderness and received the instructions from God to build the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the predecessor of the temple, the portable temple, as it were, the tabernacle. So there were 39 categories of labor, but what kind of labor? Constructive labor, right? Labor with an end in view, that you were constructing something, right? Whether you were harvesting the plants that were going to become the dyes for the fabrics or the fiber of the fabrics, or you're going to be writing to make the plans, or you're sewing or stitching or cutting or measuring or selecting or separating, or carrying, etc. These are all labors that have a constructive aspect to them. But if you do a labor that is work, but it doesn't produce any positive result, it's rather purely destructive, then even though that's certainly something that's prohibited by rabbinic decree, it is actually not a violation of the Torah's prohibition of doing labor on Shabbos, because the Torah prohibits us to do constructive labor. So some kind of destructive work, it's prohibited, but if you do it, you're not liable to bring a sin offering. You're exempt from bringing the sin offering because you've only violated a rabbinic decree, not a Torah law. So this Rav Huna Bar Chananah is saying to his son, when you go see the sage, Rabbi Zerika, ask him, according to the opinion that says one who inflicts a destructive wound is exempt, i.e., that the one who causes a wound on Shabbos that has no constructive effect, but rather is purely destructive in nature, has not performed a prohibited labor and is therefore exempt from bringing a sin offering. According to that opinion, how are we to understand our Mishnah when it says that one who slaughtered the Paschal lamb for those who cannot eat it is liable? Since the slaughter is invalid, he should be seen as having wounded the animal in a way that brings no benefit and is simply destructive. What has he improved through the slaughter that he should be liable for having performed a prohibited labor, right? Since nobody can eat that lamb that was slaughtered, okay, so he slaughtered on Shabbos, which is definitely prohibited by Torah law. But normally what's prohibited by Torah law is that you slaughter an animal because you're going to use it for something. But here in this case, where it's the Paschal lamb, which has been consecrated to be a Paschal lamb, and then it gets slaughtered on Shabbos, but nobody can eat it, in which case, if nobody can eat it, it was consecrated for a certain group, and then they can't eat it because they became impure or they died or some other reason, then that animal, tragically, is going to have to go to waste. It's just going to have to be burned. You can't give it to other people to eat. That's just one of the rules of the Paschal offering. So in that situation, the person hasn't accomplished anything positive or constructive. It's purely destructive. This is the question. So why does the one who slaughters it become liable to bring a sin offering? He obviously didn't do this intentionally, kill it. He didn't know that nobody would be able to eat it. He didn't know that. That's why it's an unwitting violation. Excuse me. The Gemara answers, he has improved the animal, even though nobody's going to be able to eat it, so it's not going to serve as food as it was originally intended. Not only food, but so that people would have that spiritual, ingesting of a piece of food that represents, our God saving us from slavery in Egypt. So even though nobody's going to eat it, but when he slaughters the lamb or the young goat, he has improved it in that if the sacrificial parts of the offering ascended to the top of the altar, they do not descend, right? So when you slaughter the Passover lamb, that can only be done when the temple is standing in Jerusalem. So this is something that hasn't happened in 2,000 years. But when the temple stood, and the people would bring their lambs, and they would observe Passover as a pilgrimage festival in Jerusalem. They wouldn't just slaughter it, roast it, and eat it, right? They slaughtered it in the temple courtyard. There was a priest there to receive some of the blood, because when you make a kosher slaughter, it's only by taking a very sharp knife across the jugular and windpipe of the animal. The lifeblood spurts out, like that first gush of blood is what kills the animal. Some of that blood is caught, and it's sprinkled on the altar in the temple. And there are also some sacrificial parts of the animal. I'm not sure what they are. Some fats, maybe the kidneys, just some small parts of the animal which are actually brought on the altar as a burnt offering, right? So a part of the animal gets burned on the altar. And as we've seen elsewhere in the Torah, when we bring sacrifices in purity and with the proper intention, and they're placed on the altar and burned, the Torah says that creates a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Rashi explains, why is it a pleasing aroma to the Lord? The Lord, we're in God. God is not a corporeal being. God doesn't eat like we eat. What is it that's pleasing to God about us bringing sacrifices? It's that we're bringing that which is most valuable to us in an agricultural, pastoral society. When they would bring an animal, that was an incredibly valuable thing that was being offered. And we were offering it with a generous and full heart. And what were we doing? We were doing what God told us to do. What's pleasing to God is that he gave us a command and we're fulfilling it. That's what makes it a pleasing aroma to God. So when this man slaughters some of that Paschal lamb, even though it was with the intent that people, a little bit would go on the altar and the rest would be eaten by the people on Passover night, and now it turns out that people can't eat it, nevertheless, a little bit of it went up on the altar, and that was a positive and constructive outcome from the slaughter. The halacha is that if the sacrificial parts of a disqualified offering are inadvertently brought up to the top of the altar, they need not be removed, and they may be burned on the altar. Thus, the slaughter has some constructive effect. We learned in the next clause of our Mishnah that if one slaughtered the Paschal lamb and it was found to have a hidden condition that would cause it to die within 12 months, that's a treifa, he is exempt from bringing a sin offering, because this is not something that he could have ascertained before he slaughtered it. Even with a careful examination of the animal, he could not have known that it was a treifa until it was slaughtered and it was opened. The Mishnah's wording indicates that if the animal's condition is visible, its owner is liable. In other words, if you slaughter an animal that has a blemish, that if you had inspected the animal carefully enough, you would have seen the blemish of that animal, and then you wouldn't have brought it because you knew it was disqualified. In that case, you have to bring the sin offering because you slaughtered a disqualified animal. But if you only find out that the animal was disqualified after, and you only could find out after it was slaughtered and you opened it up and discovered that internal defect, then you are not liable to bring the sin offering. It may be asked, what has he improved by slaughtering an animal with such a condition? The Gemara answers, because when they open it up and discover that it's a treifa, they don't put some of its parts up on the altar. The Gemara answers, nevertheless, he has improved it in that he removed it from the category of an animal carcass, a nevela, right? Because when he slaughtered this animal, which was a treifa, you couldn't know that until he slaughtered it. But because he slaughtered it, the animal was removed from becoming a nevela. In other words, what makes it a treifa? That internal defect is like a ticking bomb inside the animal. That animal's alive now, it's walking around, but that defect that's inside is going to kill it within 12 months. That's what it means to be a treifa. It's the kind of defect that will kill the animal. And usually the example that's given is like it had a thorn in its lung that's eating away at the lung, and eventually it's going to kill the animal. When that animal dies, of this disease or this internal injury, etc., then it would be an animal that was not slaughtered in a kosher manner. When an animal dies, some kind of natural death, or any kind of death that's not by a kosher slaughter, then its carcass imparts tuma. If you touch that carcass at all, then you become tameh, ritually impure, and you would have to go through a purification process to become tahor again, to become ritually pure again. So when he slaughtered that animal, he removed it from the possibility of becoming a nevela. Even though if you make a kosher slaughter and then it turns out to be a treifa, so it's disqualified for eating or for putting up on the altar, but it is not a source of tuma. It is not a nevela at that point. So you have improved it. An animal that died of natural causes or as the result of an improperly carried out act of ritual slaughter. Had the animal died on its own, it would have been treated as a nevela. A carcass that was, an animal that was not slaughtered through kosher slaughter, which is a primary source of ritual impurity, of tuma, rendering those who touch or carry it ritually impure, making people who touch it or carry it tameh. Proper slaughter of the animal prevents it from falling into that category and imparting tuma, ritual impurity. Ravina strongly objects to this. With regard to that which was taught elsewhere in a baraisa, that one who unwittingly slaughters a sin offering on Shabbos outside the temple for the sake of idolatry is liable to bring 3 sin offerings for it. Right? So here they're talking about one action which leads a person to become liable for bringing 3 sin offerings. Right? Now this is somebody who did it unwittingly, did it by mistake. What did he do by mistake? He slaughtered an animal outside the temple. Maybe he didn't know that you're not allowed to do that. As an offering. So he was bringing an offering, but not in the temple. At the time that the temple was standing, you could not do that. That's a sin. He did it for the sake of idolatry. Somehow that animal was being slaughtered in a place and in a context where, it was understood that it was actually an offering to an idol. That is a major, major sin. And he did it on Shabbos, right? He slaughtered an animal on Shabbos, not for the Passover offering, but God forbid, for avodah zarah, for idolatry. So this person, in slaughtering that one animal, has committed 3 major sins and becomes liable to bring 3 different sin offerings. For desecrating Shabbos, for slaughtering an offering outside the temple, and for practicing idolatry. Here too, the question may be raised. What has he improved by slaughtering the animal? Right? So, okay, we understand he definitely has to bring a sin offering because he slaughtered for idolatry and he did so outside the temple. But the fact that he did it on Shabbos, why does he have to bring that sin offering? How did he improve the animal when he slaughtered it for the purpose of idolatry and did so outside the temple? Here we cannot answer that he removed it from the category of an animal carcass and prevented it from becoming a primary source of ritual impurity, because any animal that was used as an idolatrous offering imparts ritual impurity. Therefore, it would seem that the slaughter served no constructive purpose. Rav Avira, and this is where we finish, Rav Avira said, even here, he has improved it in that he removed it from the category of limbs from a living creature. Even a non-Jew is liable if he eats meat taken from a living animal. But once the animal is slaughtered, there is no longer any liability. Accordingly, even this act of slaughter has achieved some kind of a productive result, right? So I guess the animal had the potential that while it was alive, somebody might have committed the grave sin, which is prohibited not just on Jews, but on all human beings, to tear a limb from a living animal in order to eat it. Once the animal was slaughtered, that's no longer a possibility. So in some sense, even that slaughter for the sake of idolatry outside the temple produced some kind of a constructive result, and therefore it was indeed a violation of Shabbos, and that's why 3 sin offerings are indicated in that situation. All right, that's what I've got for us today. Let me come to your comments and questions. Hold on a second. Here we go. Lucy Ram Johnson comments, also, humility seems crucial to me. The gracious acceptance of the copper coin had great power to touch the miser's heart. Absolutely. So she's referring to the story we told earlier from Rav Twerski. And I must say, anybody, and this is really everybody, whenever you're engaged in the practice of raising funds for a cause, right? Raising charity for some kind of nonprofit, for some kind of, whatever you're collecting for, whether it's to feed people, to shelter people, to clothe people, to educate people, if it's, to get a politician that you believe in elected, whatever it is, when you're collecting money for a good cause that's going to benefit the community, everyone who's been in that position, and at some point everybody has collected money for some good cause. So you've had the experience that you're going to run into people of all different, propensities to give. Not just their general propensity to give, but where they are that day, where they are that year, what their ability to give, what their, what their feeling is that day, how much they're going to give. And sometimes very generous people are tapped out and they can't give that day. Maybe they only give a very little bit. And sometimes you find people that really don't have the means to give a lot, but it's a cause they really believe in, or you caught them on the right day and they give generously. No matter what the gift is. As the person collecting, remember this story and the way that Rabbi Shneur Zalman received the moldy copper penny from the miser Velvel. Receive every donation with tremendous gratitude and appreciation. Bill Eldridge says there's a quote from Rabbi Tarfon that a number of my colleagues hang over their desks when working on their dissertations. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you permitted to abandon it. Exactly, with regard to Rav Twerski's lesson, that we're never given a task that is beyond us, right? We may not succeed in every task that we undertake. For sure, we're gonna fail many times in our life. But the task that we were given is, when it comes to us, you make every effort. And perhaps what seems like a failure actually will prove to be a success in the long run when we look back at what that mission and that task really led to in our own lives and in the lives of the people around us. All right, my friends, that's what I've got for us this evening. May we be inspired by the holy teachings of Rav Avraham Twerski M.D. I highly recommend these 2 books among his 60 books that he wrote, Not Just Stories and Living Each Day. These are really amazing, amazing books. By the way, I've got a bunch of recommended books. If you go to accidentaltalmudist.org, in the navigation pane, there's one thing called books, right? And I'm pretty sure the URL, I'm not 100% sure, but it'll probably work. And if not, just go to the website and navigate to it. But accidentaltalmudist.org/books. And Nina, maybe you could put that in the comments. And just a lot of books that have been meaningful to me in my Jewish journey and my wisdom journey. And perhaps you'll like them too. And I know I've got this book there, and I'm pretty sure I've got this book there as well, with links to them on Amazon. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. Have a great night, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night at the regular time.